started out over here instead of making a long walk to get the chair. So for y'all who've been here a while, you know if I'm getting the chair, the chair came before the pillow. So before we had the pillow to keep it, we had the chair to keep him. And because of that, you obviously know there are times in life when difficult things can arise and you can just kind of duck it. And then there are other times when, as I've talked to the elders this morning already, because of the announcement we had last week, I literally told them I've had more doctrinal questions this week than I've had my entire time here with y'all. And so to keep it at a minimum as to what Marcus thinks, I'm going to let you know what Marcus thinks God says. So I'm going to try to do my best to follow in the wisdom that I saw in the elders last week in, as I already told them, the approach they took. Not telling you who you have to associate with, but reading you the scriptures and telling you what they think the scriptures suggest for them and for us. And so with that, I ordinarily, I told the young people, I don't preach holiday sermons. And so when special events come up, because I've been going through the word as it is, I kind of preach through it. It must be something about the spirit of this church, but I've preached more holiday sermons here than I've preached my whole life. And so once again, as I was starting off with the lesson this week, getting things prepared, I was like, I'm not diverting my attention from, and then there it was. I was like, oh my goodness. And so I had the choice to either ignore it or just try to kind of let God work through what I saw this week to help us hopefully get a little bit more insight. And I'm going to, like I said, if I'm following in the wisdom of what I saw in the elders last week, that means I'm not telling you what to do. But what I am wanting to do is something I stole from somebody else, and that's the Bible Project, and they refer to themselves as Bible nerds. And so I want to be less a preacher this morning and more of a Bible nerd, so that hopefully you all can challenge, God willing, in a healthy way, anything that I've said. Because like I've said, I've had at least, I don't like the number, I've had at least 4 conversations. For anybody who's talked with me, you're not alone. I've had at least 4 conversations with 4 different people, 4 different families this week on this. And that's why I told the elders, I'm not running from it. I'm just going to try to talk about it and qualify it as, to the degree is my opinion, get rid of it. But God willing, we'll get some biblical insights on some of the things we've had happen, some of the things we've seen recently. And for those who were not here, last week the elders made a formal announcement of disfellowship of a member, former member here. So that's the context with which we will get into the lesson this morning. And it's going to start in Joshua. My Bible was turned to Joshua. The lesson is from Luke 23. It's really going to start from the scripture reading. So I tried to kind of use a more conventional approach to the scripture readings. He literally read where I'm starting. And the reason why I saw it as a connection to what is going on with us right now is, you know, I'm not stretching it. This is Luke 23. This is literally our reading from this week, the end of Luke, going into the first 2 chapters of John. And so we're talking about the crucifixion, as we've already heard from the communion talk. The thing that helped me kind of realize that it literally does connect with what we're doing right now is, I've told you all in the past, I like it when what I do as a preacher overlaps with conventional wisdom. And there is this thing in the law that's called due process. There are 2 types of due process. There is procedural due process and substantive due process. Procedural due process is, let me just make it, plain. It's you check all the right boxes in doing what we need to get done. Substantive due process realizes that even when we get all the steps taken care of, we can still reach the wrong place. And so that's why both of those concepts are not simply a fundamental of American law, they're a fundamental of biblical jurisprudence. And and that's what we see here in Luke. If you look at those conveniently isolated verses 13 through 16, roughly 17, if you notice, 17 is not literally there. It usually means there's a footnote in the version saying that there's an additional portion that's disputed. But what we're seeing here is a situation where all the boxes are checked, and I don't know if I realized it, at least realized that it should be phrased this way, but all the while I've been studying Jesus' crucifixion, I never realized that they lost the trial. I don't mean Jesus lost the trial, Jesus won. Look at verses 13 through 16. Emphasized more clearly in Luke, because what happened here is Herod and Pilate, they didn't get along. They weren't believers. They weren't a part of the nation of Israel. But ultimately what happens is these 2 people who come from outside of Israel's laws, they realize there's not enough here. And so what happens is it goes on beyond the fact that Jesus actually run the trial to help us understand that that's procedural due process. By the procedural due process, he goes home. However, there is the substantive portion where you still have the opportunity, it's almost like a second bite of the apple, to get it wrong. And so what happens in Jesus' trial is from verses 18 on through 25, what we see is the fact that they take a second bite of the apple through the crowd. And it's not as clear in Luke, but it's more clear if you back up with me to Mark, because this is part of the synoptic gospels that they all talk about. This is part of the synoptic gospels that they all talk about. And backing up to Mark chapter 15, in the same, I guess, relatively or similar version of the story. Round about verse 6, it's going to also talk about Pilate in another famous portion of the story where it says, "Now at the feast he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, 'Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?' For he perceived it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, 'Then what shall I do with the man you call king of the Jews?' And they cried out again, 'Crucify him.' And Pilate said to them, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they shouted all the more, 'Crucify him.' So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified." That's their second bite at the apple. The process worked, but substantively, it still ended up in the wrong place because they were able to persuade the crowd to still come up with the wrong outcome. And going back to a verse we had in the communion talk last week, I think it was communion talk from our brother Sean. Back in Matthew, before we get to where we're going in Matthew 18, the same thing is going to happen in chapter 27, describing the crucifixion. As in verses 15 through 23. 15 through 23. It's going to say, "Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, 'Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?' For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him saying, 'Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream.' Now the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, 'Which one of the two do you want me to release to you?' And they said, 'Barabbas.' Pilate said to them, 'Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?' They all said, 'Let him be crucified.' And he said, 'Why? What evil has he done?' But they shouted all the more, 'Let him be crucified.'" Going back to what I mentioned, what I want to emphasize is the wisdom of the elders in this process, because it seems to mirror the wisdom of God in establishing, as we turn back to Matthew 18, the process for spiritual discipline. And so I work backwards for a reason, because the passage that they mentioned to us last week is a famous passage, but it has a context. Understand when we're making that distinction between the procedural due process, the rights that everybody had in Israel to make sure that they had a fair trial, like we enjoy here in the States. They also had the responsibility to make sure that the substance, the integrity of the process was maintained, so that you don't check all the boxes like we said before and still end up with the wrong outcome. What happens in the crucifixion of Christ is the boxes are all checked, but the crowd is an opportunity to subvert the integrity of the process. And so understanding when I'm saying I appreciate the wisdom of what the elders did, this is what I'm specifically talking about. I literally already told you that it is because they did not tell you, we're telling you what to do. They're saying make your own decision. Because when you look at Matthew 18, what happens is Jesus establishes a bright line between personal disputes and congregational matters. Personal disputes and congregational matters. Why? Because when you look at what happened to his son, he, I'm just going to say, is making a process where we don't repeat the same thing, where you can go through the right process and come out with the wrong outcome because of the crowd being used in a personal dispute, the way it is in, well, as we'll head forward in 1 Corinthians 5 in a congregational manner. But first of all, how do we know? Marcus, how do we know you're not stretching the truth on that whole personal dispute thing? Well, Matthew 18, famous passage. We heard it a little bit last week. Verses 15 through 20. 15 through 20. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. As of course we'll go into the famous passage about forgiveness. The ideal is, as the elders literally and specifically mentioned last week, the idea in disfellowship is restoration. But the painful part is when restoration isn't immediately possible. Disfellowship is the option that he talks about there between brethren, individuals who are not able to see eye to eye. They have a dispute. It doesn't specify the nature of the dispute, but that's one of the things that's going to distinguish it from 1 Corinthians 5 as we go to 1 Corinthians 5. And we see the difference between a personal dispute between brethren and a congregational matter that requires, as Paul is literally going to say, withdrawal. In, once again, a famous passage in verse 1 of chapter 5 of 1 Corinthians. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you of a kind that is not tolerated even among pagans. For a man has his father's wife, and you are arrogant. Ought you not rather to mourn? Let him who has done this be removed from amongst you. That's a you, but that doesn't sound like an individual you. Why? We'll keep reading. For though absent in the body, I am present in spirit as if present. I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing. When you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present, with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of the world, or the greedy, or the swindlers, or idolaters, since then you would have to go out from the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality, or greed, or is an idolater, a reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. So in that, if we need to go back through it, it's the difference between an individual dispute, Matthew 18, and then the collective list, or the list of offenses for which he's saying collective response is required. So why is that important? Because, as I said, the number of questions I've had this week about, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for my fellowship with the brother who was disfellowship last week? What do I do going forward? And as the elders answered, I can't answer that for you, but what I can tell you is these are what the scriptures say. There is a bright line that is drawn in the scriptures that distinguishes the way in which the body is used for a personal dispute. To have two people who can't get along, bring it to the body and have the body try to act as a tool of persuasion to bring them back together, and the way in which the body is used for certain sins. Look at the list again. Verse 11. Sexual immorality, greed, idolatry, reviling, being a drunkard or a swindler, for which collective response and collective withdrawal is what Paul is literally saying. Once again, I use the why not approach. If it were a collective response to what Jesus is talking about back in Matthew 18, why didn't Jesus just say it all right then, right? All right. With that, understand that what we are saying, I can't say what we are saying, I'm saying it, it's just me, is we've had some folks who've asked that maybe it'd be good to have an opportunity to speak as a congregation. I brought it up to the elders this morning. It might not be necessary, but if it is, I suggested maybe a class time when they're usually handling the class, to just give folks an opportunity to talk about their understanding of the scripture, so they can get more clarity from the leadership, not just the talking nerd, about what this fellowship actually looks like biblically. And so from that perspective, one of the things that we're looking at here is the way in which, just go back to the scriptures again in the Gospels. Another thing that's similar in the Synoptic Gospels is Judas's role in the sacrifice of the Christ. Now, one of the more popular parts is, of course, his betrayal of the Christ. But one of the other things that seemed to make his heart so susceptible to betrayal was he was in the habit of sinning. He was in the habit of taking from the common money bag, right? The money that was collectively for them all. And that carries through today. Even today, if you found that the preacher found a way to con Tom in to write them some extra money for some personal stuff, you get it right away. That's jail time, right? However, what happens is we don't necessarily understand that God looks at people with more compassion than he looks at our money. And so just as he looks at the way that the crowd was manipulated to subvert the justice due to his son, he says the same thing in terms of biblical disfellowship. There's a bright line between personal disfellowship and biblical disfellowship, because at no time in my disputes with another brother should I be able to convince enough people in the crowd to stop talking to Brother Randy just because I personally have an issue with him. Now, if as a preacher, you got the list, back to 1 Corinthians 5, I get up here and you got the evidence, praying to God, of sexual immorality, of greed, idolatry, being a reviler, a drunkard, or a swindler, then that's a congregational issue. And I'm putting myself in the seat. Maybe it's good I chose the seat today. Because instead of putting anybody else in the seat, I'm sitting here. Those are the things for which, as a body, if it is found that I am guilty of those things, as much as I love you guys, you have a responsibility to the degree it's been proven, out of love, not to talk to me no more after the process has run its course. Procedural due process. However, if the procedure is flawed in some way, then there's some questions, right? And that's where the whole substantive thing comes to mind. Because that's where we're seeing what happened to Christ. If you go back to the stories, read the Synoptic Gospels on your own time. Christ won the trial, but the substance of the proceeding, he still lost. And it was because they were able to persuade the crowd to do what the law would not allow them to do. And so that is one of the reasons why I am, looks like it really is going to be a short lesson today. Right? Because, I'm starting and ending with the wisdom of the elders. Now, even if the process didn't go completely right, I at least got something to say. I think they did that right. I think they did that exceptionally well, and it gives me something to work with, so I don't have to get up here looking like I normally do, breaking out the pillow to keep from pounding on the, right? And so we have a starting point to say that even if we don't all agree on what happened in the process, we do have elders who have at least left it open-ended enough to say we are not going to impose our understanding of biblical discipline on you. And much like people have taken the time to do this week, I appreciate every single person who has taken the time to either call or drop by in person and talk about this issue. Because I say it all the time, and it's times like this. If people don't ever stop by, it's times like this when I appreciate the fact that you stopped by, you called, or you did whatever you did. Because I'm literally ignoring this. If I don't get a phone call from somebody, I'm not going to say the person's name, and I'm literally reading the scriptures as they're describing the struggle that they're having. Otherwise, I'm ignoring it, I'm moving on, I'm probably finding one of my pet peeves in this week's reading. And so this week, hopefully, we have something that's a little bit more productive. It's not going to be a conclusion. I don't run this church, y'all know that, right? Just functionally. The bottom line, though, is those who have made a difficult choice, as Brother Barry, I think, has alluded to in the communion talk, have given us an opportunity to discuss a very difficult issue, hopefully in a healthy way. And God willing, we will do that going forward, understanding that this is just my understanding of the Scriptures. It's my understanding of the Scriptures as they deal with it right now. This is definitely not me with a definitive answer on what is what. But with that, God willing, each of us can take the time to go and understand that beyond whether it's the procedural due process or the substantive due process is the love. As I often tell you, when I preached my very first sermon here, it was called Foundation. And it's because the stronger foundation we have in all the different types of biblical literature we have, the less we have to guess about whether or not we're making the right decision. And so when you understand the way that the law was given to us in the first place, you realize it wasn't just dropped in Genesis 1. Thou shalt not. There's a story in the Torah. The whole Torah starts with the story of how God tried to do nice things for people. And law was added as it didn't work so good. As the more freedom we had, we didn't treat each other with the same kind of love and respect he had for us. And so to keep us from actually annihilating each other, law began to increase. And a part of that law, fundamentally, was just understand the context of the rules. And so as we are understanding the context of the rules of disfellowship, understand it has that context, and even going all the way back to law. There's some other illustrations I'm leaving out right now because I don't want it to become a distraction, because y'all know me and my illustrations. But there are other illustrations that these laws, they always happen in a context. And a lot of times you'll see this law about disfellowship is not separated. Just if you read Matthew, from Matthew 18 to the time he's crucified, it's in the context of how his son was treated. In a time when the law, like we said, this is my last time saying it, promise, I'm sorry. All the boxes were checked, but Israel still came out with the wrong outcome. And so with that, God willing, no matter what your perspective is on the outcome that we saw last week, God willing, we have a foundation in the Word for moving forward in a healthy direction as we together stand and sing.